So it seems that Chaos Space Marines have got a brutal melee infantry detachment. Let's talk about what these transhuman horrors can do. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today we're talking about yet another Grotmus detachment, and this time it's the turn of the Chaos Space Marines. As ever with the Grotmus detachment, we've basically had 40k rules content every day. We're getting one new detachment for each faction in the game, and all fully playable in core match play rules. It seems that day 12 is the turn of the standard Chaos. Yesterday we had some regular Space Marines, plus the big balance update of course. That one didn't really have the biggest impact on the Chaos Space Marines, though they got a few minor tweaks. And tomorrow apparently we're getting 2 detachments for the Eldari. One of them was rumoured to be a Grav Tank focused one, so I'm not too sure what the other one might be. Maybe it could be something to do with Corsairs. Perhaps Inari or Harlequins, though they are getting ones in their codex. I guess it's possible they could do Drukhari as well. It seems more likely that they'd save that for another day. In any case, Chaos Space Marines have been doing okay in 40k recently. They got some positives and negatives in the last update, a few nerfs to things like Accursed Cultists, but lots of their more regular stuff getting buffed. It still seems that most people tend to use Renegade Raiders to try and have success with them, though the Veterans of the Long War with its reactive moves, the big damage combos of the Pact-Bound Zealots, and the fun demon engines of the Soulforged Warpack all have people playing them and they're good fans as well. I felt like they had a few options for what they might do for the Chaos Space Marines, but it seems they've gone for the Creations of Bile, basically representing the gene-twisted horrors that the Spider himself sends into battle. Fabius Bile being the ex-apothecary of the Emperor's Children, now very much his own agent and force in the galaxy, acquiring massive power for himself by being able to supply Chaos Warlords with big and powerful souped-up Space Marines as he goes about the galaxy trying to improve on the Emperor's work in any way that he can. His forces often tend to fight in a mixed warband of big roided out Chaos Space Marines, though it does seem for the actual theme of this detachment, maybe Bile doesn't feel like the absolute most central figure ever. He's relevant for the main detachment special rule to the point where I think you probably want him in an army list, but otherwise basically all the stratagems and supporting rules and things just all focus around powerful Chaos Space Marine infantry, maybe more with a melee focus versus range. And that applies quite well to really quite a lot of the more exciting Chaos Space Marine units that people want to put on the table. It does feel like one of the more obvious themes they could have gone for the Chaos Space Marine Grotmus detachment. The Creations of Bile did have their own army section and everything in the 9th edition codex. I feel like perhaps one of the other more obvious ones they could have done would have been something like the Word Bearers maybe, perhaps going heavy on things for Demon Kin and Possessed and Dark Apostles and things like that, as a lot of people didn't really feel like the Pact Band particularly gelled with their entire vibe. To be fair though, this detachment does seem rather good if you do want to put a whole bunch of Possessed on the table. Jumping into the rules though, and the core rule for the army is experimental augmentations. This one applies to Heretic Astartes infantry units only, and no damned models, and you basically get a boost for those determined at the start of the game, 1 or 2 bonus rules that get given to literally every single one of your infantry units. You have the choice of either predictably choosing one thing from the list, or rolling randomly, so you roll 2d6 and apply both buffs. So if you happen to get unlucky and both roll the same result, then they don't stack and you also can't re-roll. I feel like the chance of that is just a bit of a feels bad one there. In an army of this without Bile, there's a 1 in 6 chance that you just get one buff anyway, but it's randomly determined even if you go for the 2d6 option. Feels like they should have prevented that. If Bile is in the army though, and is your warlord, then you can re-roll 1 or both of the dice. And I guess that could provide some insurance against doubling up like that, and hopefully just try and slant the ones that you roll towards the types of ones that you do want, if you think there's going to be 1 or 2 of the buffs that just won't matter too much in this matchup. In any case, for the enhancements, we've got +1 attack, which is just a very nice melee buff all around. That's going to be useful in just about every army, I think. +2 movement is a big help for getting your units into melee, particularly given that there's an advance and charge stratagem in this detachment. Melee weapons gaining +1 weapon skill, again, is a nice boost there. In general, that's not going to be quite as powerful as the +1 attack thing given Dark Pacts, but again, definitely doesn't hurt, and that'll make your warriors more dangerous. There's a +1 toughness option, which means that things like Legionaries and Chosen would go to toughness 5, and Possessed and Terminators up to toughness 6. That one's going to be quite enemy dependent. If you've got weapon profiles that are going to be greatly affected by that, then it's a big deal. If not, then it won't. There's a +1 strength to melee weapons, again kind of dependent on the profiles that you're fighting against. Strength 6 accursed weapons on Terminators or Chosen, or Strength 5 chain swords on Legionaries, both seem nice though. You could get the Chaos Lord up to Strength 10 on his big turn of damage dealing too. And finally there's +1 ballistic skill for ranged weapons, which feels like it has the least synergy with the melee units that you're probably going to want to include in this, but could still be rather nice for obliterators. It definitely feels like you could justify some of those in here if you wanted. It definitely feels interesting, though I feel like there's a big gulf between the absolute best results that you could roll, and if you happen to get unlucky for a game. I feel like literally all the buffs are handy enough, though if you go into about choosing them and only had one, it might just feel a bit underwhelming as the core thing for the detachment. Maybe compared with something reliably helpful like the assault keyword and AP buffs that you get from Renegade Raiders and similar. If you go random though, even with Fabius Bile's rerolls, it could be very swingy from game to game. Some games you could get exactly what you want, other games you might just literally get one buff that you don't want, or two of the ones that are going to be somewhat unhelpful. It might just limit it a little bit at higher levels of play, even if it adds a bit of fun factor and variety from game to game in more casual games. In general, my guess is that you probably would want Fabius Bile as the Warlord here, and then probably have two of the buffs with a chance to reroll to try and mitigate against some of the worst combos that you could roll. Certainly if you double up on the same one, but you could maybe consider re-rolling both of them if you say round up rolling +1 ballistic skill and +1 strength in a matchup where those might not matter so much. Bile himself I think has enough going on his data sheets to be worth the points though. He's 85 points and gives you +1 strength and toughness, either for Chaos Chosen, Legionaries, Accursed Cultists or a Cultist mob. I feel like you could have some arguments to taking him with most of those. Perhaps the Accursed Cultists you'd be a bit more tempted by the Dark Commune with their invulnerable saves and things though. Otherwise, for what he does, he has a Rod of Torment for a bunch of AP1 damage 3 attacks, has a nice defensive rule where he translates a damage characteristic of an attack to 0, so guaranteed extra sturdiness for his units, and he himself is really quite tough, 5 wounds with a 5+ feel no pain, and then gets back up on a 2+ the first time he's dead. I think between all of that and also giving you reroll manipulation, is probably worth it in this detachment. Before we jump into the stratagems, I'll just give a quick shout out to today's video sponsor and toy Snowman, a collectibles and Warhammer store in Canada, who have been developing their Warhammer 40k range and sell Warhammer for 15% off Games Workshop prices. They do most of the things that you'd usually expect of a discount Warhammer retailer, shipping nationwide with free shipping at $150 Canadian, usually $15 for less than that, and they're posting via UPS via the postal strike. And if there's any Games Workshop items that you don't see in their store, you can email their sales email to request things that they don't have in stock. In any case, I'll give their website a link down in the video description. Feel free to check them out if you're looking to pick up some discount miniatures in Canada. And in any case, a massive thank you to them for sponsoring the video. Moving on though, let's get into the stratagems, and first up for 1 CP we've got Monstrous Visages, and this one's -1 to hit one of your infantry units either at range or in melee. Nice enough to have access to a reactive durability stratagem. It's going to be a bit better against certain things than others. For things that rely on sustained or lethal hits or big rerolls to do their damage, it won't be quite as big, but still nice if you've got a big scary melee unit that's moving up the board to make it a bit harder for the enemy to focus down. For 1 command point, there's the Masters of Watching. This one's a Fights on Death on a 4+, declared when your unit gets attacked as opposed to losing casualties, and you can use it on damned models, but they get a -1 to the test. Again, this one seems at least like a decently useful one. Kind of feels a bit of the way that they used to play back in 9th edition with their Fights on Death type thing. They could have their units running up to the enemy, dealing a whole bunch of damage, and then if the enemy countercharges and destroys them in return, potentially take a chunk of them with them. Again, that one's definitely reasonable enough for 1 command point. Next up, for 2 CP we've got Delayed Mutations. This one causes your units to take D3 mortal wounds to gain 1 additional enhancement boost from the list, and that takes effect from your command phase all the way until your next one. So that could be anything like the +1 attack, the +2 to move, the +1 toughness, any of that stuff. And to be honest, I feel like this one's just not really all that great for 2 command points. I feel like most of those buffs would be genuinely quite interesting at 1 command point, but 2 CP is just far too much for what they do under normal circumstances, and even more so in that you have to take D3 mortal wounds on your units to be able to use it in the first place. In some cases that could potentially even make it worse than useless. Say if you wanted one of the melee buffs and then you wind up getting one of your models killed as a result. So basically the rest of the squad fight a bit harder, but you've lost the attacks of one guy, and that really takes the edge off it. I think in general it would have to be a kind of game-changing bit to commit to this. Maybe it could be a little bit more justifiable if you got a Chaos Lord for the -1 command point for stratagems. Maybe that could make it a little bit more viable. Next up for 1 command point we've got Diabolic Regeneration. This one's quite a nice one for restoring models to the board. Again, it's Heretic Astartes infantry besides damned units. You return 1 destroyed model to the squad, or D3 destroyed models to a battle line unit if you use it on those. As usual, they can't be used to revive character models that got slain. As it goes, I think that this one's really quite nice value. Seems really good for things like Terminators, where you're getting quite a lot of points back to the board, as for Possessed, and the same with Legionaries. I guess in theory the biggest scariest thing that you could bring back would be an Obliterator. That would depend on you having the squad of 2 drop, then the opponent kills one but not the other. As normal with model revival stratagems as well, you could also do a couple of shenanigans with it, putting the restored models at the front of the unit so any eventual charges that they make are a little bit shorter, or potentially piling more models onto an objective to try and take that, given that you can do this in the command phase before objectives are scored. This one's really quite a nice one. It would have to be a little bit opportunistic, given that you'd have to be targeting units that had taken casualties, but it seems likely that there's going to be targets, given that you'll probably have multiple big scary units of infantry running around. Next up is another 2 command point one called Specimens for the Spider. This one allows an infantry unit to reroll wounds against a character unit in melee, and then if the character model is actually slain, you trigger some battle shock tests within 6 inches, one if it's a regular character, or for all units if it's the warlord. Again, this one feels a bit painful that it's a 2 command point one rather than a 1 command point one. I guess maybe could be justifiable on a unit of Possessed, that way you could fish for some more devastating wounds if it made sense to, or perhaps could be interesting for a Chaos Lord with Chosen. He'd feel like quite a good target on paper, as he could access the stratagem for just the 1 command point. Being locked to only against character units though means that it won't be able to be used against a lot of big tough monsters and vehicles that you might want to, and the battle shock bit of it is usually going to be a bit meaningless even if it ever triggers, and even if the opponent fails the battle shock tests. Most of the time it's just not relevant for the end of the turn. Again, I'd expect this one to be really quite rarely used. Finally, for 1 command point, there's Auto Stimulants, a much more simple and effective infantry unit gets to advance and charge. A nice support one, this one, and often worth using if it's going to make your charge a lot more reliable. Chosen can already do this, but for things like Possessed or Legionaries or Chaos Terminators, it could well make the difference between making a big combat and not doing so. And as usual, this one's always a really good melee support stratagem. Overall, I feel like the stratagem support really isn't too bad. -1 to hit, fights on death on a 4+, reviving models, and the advance and charge are all really good support for melee things. It's the big 2 command point ones that just seem a fair bit pricier, maybe only really justifiable with a Chaos Lord, and even then only in really specific situations. They both just seem a bit expensive for what they do, rather than being a source of strength for the detachment. Then we've got the Enhancement, first up Surgical Precision for 10 points. If you've got the 10 points left over, this one seems pretty reasonable, just giving precision to a non-damned character's weapons. Definitely not awful as an extra one. Could be handy to allow a Chaos Lord to threaten that if he needed to in close combat, though it's not the sort of thing that's going to come up every game. A lot of time precision's just not relevant for one reason or another, and it always could flex into it if you desperately needed it with Epic Challenge, though that would mean not doing something else with those command points. For 15 points, there's Living Carapace. This one gives you +1 wound and a 5+ feel no pain for Chaos Lords only. That does make them solely harder to kill once the squad has been taken down, very unlikely to die to precision weapons as well. And I guess a Terminator Lord becomes extra tanky. For the more standard Lord on foot though, that means that you'd on average have to take around about 9 wounds off him to bring him down rather than 5, which is a fair bit more. Again, maybe just feels a little bit on the take or leave side for 15 points though. By the time he's down to just 1 model, there might be a pretty good chance that this isn't the sort of thing that stops him from dying anyway. Not awful if you do have space for it and you don't want the big expensive one though. Next up, for 25 points, there's the Helm of All-Seeing. This one prevents arriving from reserve within 12 inches of the bearer, and it's for non-damned infantry models only. This one feels like it's just not going to be quite as relevant now 3-inch deep strikes got toned down to 6 inches. Still maybe not awful. I guess you could push it on a Warpsmith or something if you happen to have one buffing some big guns that are sitting at the back. That maybe feels a little bit out of place in this detachment though. I can't help but think that you'd be a bit more tempted to run things like Obliterators for big firepower here. Finally, for 35 points, there's Prime Test Subject. Again, infantry only, so no Demon Princes, but it gives you +1 damage to your bearer's melee weapons, and whenever they fight, they can reroll all their hit rolls if they want to. This one again seems best on a Chaos Lord, and it means that you could have his big turn of extra damage and AP and everything, could be Strength 9, AP 3, and a big damage 4. And re-rolling all the hit rolls as well, which makes his Demon Hammer version a bit more tempting. But either way, he's going to be punching incredibly hard. At 35 points though, you are making the unit that he's leading quite a lot more expensive. That is going to be a big commitment to the point where I think it's a bit borderline worth it, and he might just be absolutely fine with the base model Chaos Lord to handle the majority of threats that you might face. Overall, at first impressions, I think it's definitely interesting. It does give a bit better melee support than a bunch of the Chaos detachments do out there. It really has quite a lot of things that focus around fighty elites, giving them genuinely helpful improvements. I feel like the core buff mechanic is going to be a fairly frustrating one, kind of having combos that you might easily really want to be able to pick there, but either going random or only getting one bit of them. Both probably means there's a good chance to wind up disappointed. My guess would be to have Fabius Bile be the Warlord and then re-roll 2 random ones, seeming to be the best way to get value out of it, though I guess on given matchups maybe you could think about just choosing one if that's going to be absolutely critical. Otherwise though, most of the fighty Chaos elites seem to get some pretty good stuff here. Obliterators look like they'd be worth having, as they can do some pretty nice firepower already and are getting used in competitive lists, and then they can actually make use of the +1 ballistic skill if you happen to roll that. I certainly love the revival stratagem as well, and means that the opponent would have to think carefully about how they try and kill them and make sure they actually can destroy both models. Otherwise seems particularly nice for possessed as well. Pretty much all of the stat line improvements besides the ballistic skill help them out fairly nicely. Legionaries and Chosen will enjoy things like the extra movement to be able to get to combat and any of the melee buffs when they get there, and seems pretty nice for Terminators as well. Advance and Charge, Fights on Death, and Reviving Models are all really nice support, and if you want to have an ultra fighty Chaos Lord, the Test Subject enhancement seems usable, though it's a bit on the pricey side. For downsides, I feel like those 2 command point stratagems are both a bit on the overcosted side really. The other enhancements aren't bad, but just seem a bit passable and a bit take or leave, and I feel like the detachment's randomness on the core mechanic really makes it a little bit less overwhelmingly positive, even if it has a bit of fun factor. In any case though, seems pretty cool if you want to run a whole bunch of Chaos Melee elites of most stripes. I think for armies that go incredibly heavy on the close combat, this one seems potentially a bit better than some of the other detachments out there, though perhaps things like Pat Band and Veterans and things have a bit more support for ranged armies. My initial impression is that it's probably not going to be the single strongest Chaos Space Marine detachment, but hopefully people will have a bit of success and experiment with it. Feels like there's enough here to be interesting, and probably a fairly well balanced one overall. Let me know what you think of these Chaos monstrosities though. Look forward to hearing your thoughts down in the comments. If you'd like to watch my other videos on the other Grotmus detachments, you'll find them linked in the playlist down below. As mentioned earlier, feel free to check out Toy Snowman if you live in Canada and Montreal, if you want to pick up some Warhammer miniatures at 15% off. Thanks to them for sponsoring this one. In any case, I'll leave that one there for now. Looks like we've got some Eldari things tomorrow, and hopefully I'll be back to talk about some other stuff in the meantime. So feel free to subscribe to the channel or check back later if you'd like to see more like this. Finally, if you've been enjoying all the videos on the channel, I would just like to mention that Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page as well, and you can find that linked in the video description. Channel patrons do get a fair few advantages, seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things happen next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with a chance to win some big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, the link is down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.